The old saying is, like a house of cards. So that must mean fragile. That must mean imminent collapse. I know that a house of cards can be way more stable than anyone thinks.
This Harvard-educated designer draws on his background in architecture to build unbelievable structures out of cards. They can hold bricks, withstand leaf blowers, and some are dozens of stories tall.
I don't really think there's a limit to how tall a house of cards can be. Like, the limit is your ceiling and, just having enough cards. My name is Brian Berg, and I'm a professional card stacker.
Berg's career in card stacking started when he was 8 years old. He broke his first world record when he was in high school in 1992. Since then, he's broken several world records, often beating his own previous record.
I know this will kind of sound crazy, but I actually don't even know how many times I've done a Guinness project. So I know I've done the world's largest house of cards twice, tallest house of cards in 12 hours once, and then the tallest house of cards, I want to say I've officially went after a record, I think 6, 8 times at least.
And the one where he built the tallest house of cards in 12 hours? It was on top of a fully loaded washing machine that was turned on and spinning at 1,000 revolutions per minute.
Guinness kind of worked hand in hand with us to create a new record category that was tallest house of cards in 12 hours with an asterisk on top of a loaded spinning washing machine. That's not part of the category, but just had to make it even more impossible. Of course, I was kind of terrified that I would get a couple hours into it and it would kind of start vibrating. Anyway, it's just nuts sometimes what I have to do. The thing I always liked about the cards was it wasn't figured out. You had to sort of invent your way through it. You had to make it work.
When Berg's not chasing world records, clients pay him to build card structures for events and commercials. He's been stacking cards professionally since 1994, but he started building when he was just a little kid.
Card playing has always been a big part of my mom's side of the family. While, everyone was refilling drinks, taking a bathroom break, my grandfather would oftentimes, build a small house of cards with one deck. And it would get 2 or 3 or maybe 4 stories tall. It would collapse and he'd, curse, and then the card playing would resume. And so that was my real introduction to card stacking, was my grandfather. He did teach me a few things, but I really don't use those techniques anymore. Everything else that I do is a sort of series of happy accidents that I've discovered along the way. I'll have a lot of people come up to me when I'm working and they'll say, "You should have been an architect." And I'm like, well, that's my real background.
Berg does have a degree in architecture and a master's in design from Harvard, but by the time he went to college, he was already an expert card house builder, a craft defined by trial and error. And one of the most critical discoveries he made was that the typical pyramid shape won't cut it.
All the engineers and architects out there will tell you that the triangle is the strongest shape, and it is, but it kind of relies on the ends being fixed together or being forced to be together. There's nothing forcing these anywhere other than gravity to the ground like you just saw.
So Berg relies on squares and right angles instead.
The primary technique is, what I call the grid. The grid is, you're setting the cards at right angles at their midpoints to create basically a bunch of boxes. For me, card stacking, the more I figure out about it, the more I'm able to do. And the more I'm able to do, it just sets me up for the next discovery. There's the grid, there's the column that came out of the grid technique. There's the wall that came out of the column technique. I would say that the majority of things that I come up with now are some sort of a tangent of a tangent of a tangent of something else that I already knew how to do. At every single project, I sort of have a little observation that makes me better. Or I'll do something without even realizing it and think, oh, that worked. Or, oh, that looks cool. And I just kind of keep adding it to my repertoire.
Berg recreated the Beijing Olympic Village in cards in a Chinese mall in 2008.
For that, I built the Bird Nest Stadium, which was another thing that I had no clue how I was going to even possibly do that. But I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I got thousands of people standing there watching me, including my client, when I'm starting it and it's not working, it's falling over, and I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? But that's the fun thing about it, is you just have to invent your way out of the problem and keep moving.
Berg built the world's tallest card structure in 2007. It stood just a smidge over 26 feet tall. And for this one, he tried something new. He built with the card standing vertically instead of horizontally. He had never used that method to go that tall.
When I built what I would call the latest version of the tallest house of cards, that was a little bit intimidating because it was probably 3 times taller than I had ever used that technique before. So I just, took a risk and went for it. So I really didn't know what would happen.
It required over 1,000 decks of cards and took about a month to build, and it stood, and it was surprisingly strong.
So 1,000 decks of cards, built to, into the world's tallest house of cards is, somewhere in the neighborhood of 140 pounds, which means that no sneeze is going to knock that over. It's actually going to take a pretty big force. So I was using a leaf blower to knock that house of cards down, and the leaf blower started smoking and quit working during the implosion. So I just threw the leaf blower down and had to go after it with my hands. So, card house defeats leaf blower, go figure.
Berg sometimes uses 3 to 4 cards instead of just 1 because adding weight to the structure adds stability.
It's just a lot more stable than they think it is. Is it fragile? Yes. But is it going to just fall down because you threw a penny at it or because you walked past it? Probably not. And a lot of that is just because how many cards are involved. Think about how heavy a stack of newspapers is or a stack of magazines. It's really heavy. When you forget about all of that mass, and it's more of a brick house, less of a card house.
Berg used over 200,000 cards to build the world's largest card structure back in 2010.
In this case, it was basically a massive replica of the Venetian casino in Macau. It was 4,000 decks, 45 days. It's actually more than 45 days of work because the last week of it, I really didn't sleep.
And when he finished, he used a tried and true method to knock it all down. A giant fan. Berg has built a couple of things with glue when clients asked him to, but aside from these exceptions, Berg is a card stacking purist.
I don't tape or glue the cards, bend them or fold them or modify them in any way. I think the thing that surprises people is that gluing is actually just insanely time intensive. It takes 100 times longer than just letting gravity line everything up for you.
When Berg was given 10 hours to build whatever he wanted, he decided to try something he had never built before.
For this rocket, when I got here, I didn't exactly know how I was going to do it. I didn't exactly know how it would turn out, but I had an idea, and I knew that as I kind of started working through it, that I'd figure out what I wanted to do.
He started by making sure the conditions were right.
There's always some sort of climactic consideration. Is there a subway outside, down 3 stories? But another one is the humidity. So if it's too humid, the cards will take on all this water vapor because they're made out of paper, and they'll want to kind of curl up. Likewise, if it's too dry, they will do the same thing. They'll kind of start to change shape.
Berg leaned on his architectural background to build the different elements of this rocket. In this case, the main structural design was a series of columns arranged around a hollow center. He designed as he went, listening to his instincts, like he always does.
One big surprise on this project was that I didn't finish covering the outside of the rocket because I actually really liked the kind of lines chasing down it. And so I just left it. And, I could have built a central post in the middle, and, I could have built a shear wall or 2 inside to stabilize it, but I didn't for the sake of time. And the cool thing about not doing any of those things is that it created this totally hollow structure that looks really cool without the skin on it. So it's, again, happy accidents.
Here's the thing about Berg's craft. He can't move the things he builds, and they're usually in public spaces. So almost everything he builds has to be destroyed shortly after finishing.
A question I get a lot is, aren't you heartbroken when you destroy one of your works? And it's well, honestly, no, because people love it. People are just drawn to destruction. They like to see stuff, collapse and fall. It's never a good scene, I think, but when it's a house of cards, it's just good, clean fun. I know it can't stay up forever. I mean, I can't take it home with me, so might as well have a good time knocking it down. And the other part of it is I sort of treat each implosion as a little bit of a test. The sort of structural nerd in me really likes seeing like what it can take. And then, witnessing that, I go forward knowing that, the project that I'm working on next is just not gonna fall down randomly. It helps me understand the limits. I'm testing it. I'm having a good time. I'm knocking it down because I kind of have to. And that, almost more than anything, has given me guts.
And those guts he developed mean that he has no fear when he stands on a ladder and finishes these incredible architectural feats.
When I'm up there putting the last few cards on, I'm not even remotely worried about it collapsing out from underneath me because I just know from experience that it's just not going to happen. My track record of success with cards is just because, it's the right mix of, using what you know and just the right amount of risk and, hope for the best.